Hi, everyone who's on. I see we have a great number of people. So why don't we go ahead and get started? The way we're going to do this today, it may be different in future webinars, is that I'm going to provide kind of a short and probably oversimplistic summary of some of the research that's been done so far on siblings. And I have to say there's not enough. And then we're going to move into how we're taking what we know from research and then putting it together with some ideas for programs that ASF and the Els Center are going to collaborate on. So, and we also have Sibs here, obviously, that we really want, we really want your input as we're going along to share your experiences, your ideas, and your thoughts. So while we go through this, I just want you in your mind to kind of think about what's the most challenging aspect of having a sibling on the spectrum. And also, what's the most positive thing? Like, as you think about challenges and obstacles and potentially burdens, what are some good things? What are some things that your sibling has taught you? What are some things that you feel you are as a person because your sibling is on the spectrum? Also, think about what questions you want researchers to answer. And then also, finally, what would you like to talk about with other siblings that you may not be able to talk about with friends? One of the things we're going to discuss is how social support mechanisms are so important, and that can be from family members, and family members are usually the best source of support, to your larger group of friends, to sometimes people have friends with other siblings, to teachers, to really anyone, but these social support networks are really important. So what is it that you'd like to ask? What is it that you'd like to say? What is it that you'd like to share? So you don't have to answer those questions, but just go ahead and just think about them as we go along. So first of all, what do we know about siblings? And most of what we know is from siblings, infant siblings. So siblings that have a younger, so this is the Infant Sibling Project, where we're looking at, or scientists are looking at, younger siblings. So there's an individual who has a diagnosis and then a younger sibling. And those younger siblings have a 20% probability of an ASD diagnosis themselves. So researchers are really able to look at what the early signs and symptoms are, very early on, even before behavioral symptoms emerge. And what we know that 20% actually have an autism diagnosis. And then you have this other, of this other 80%, so these two colors here, about 30% of them have what's known as the broader autism phenotype. So 30% of that 80% have things like learning disabilities or reading challenges or language issues or even some autism symptoms themselves without being considered having an autism diagnosis. These infant sibling studies are really important because the earlier the diagnosis can be made and the knowledge of these red flags, the faster kids can get into early interventions and specific interventions that will help them throughout their lifetime. They can be delivered much more quickly and they can be delivered much more effectively. And it also allows for individual understanding of those individual features. So clinicians have said to me, understanding that there's a sibling in the family really helps me help the family, the individual, the sibling, because they have specific struggles that I may not be privy to if I didn't know this family dynamic. So it does help. And it also does help in awareness for that growing family, a family that's deciding, that those original parents that are deciding to have children, and then the siblings that may be having questions about having a child of their own. So just the general understanding of that. And this is the Baby Siblings Research Consortium. This is the webpage. And like I said, when I did a literature search, I knew this already, but when I did this literature search, I realized that like a lot of studies have been done on these infant siblings, which is a good thing. I mean, it's a good thing to do research on these infant siblings. But what's lacking is research on older siblings and a better understanding of the challenges and the opportunities and the highlights that kids who have a sibling with autism, either an older sibling or a younger sibling, experience. And so what we know from the literature is up to 6 years old, there is a higher rate. That doesn't mean it's an all or nothing thing, but siblings have a higher rate of things like ADHD. I mentioned language problems, learning disabilities, and emotional issues. Again, not everybody, but some. And then as you go to 6 to 16 years old, there's really not a lot of research. But we know that actually the rates of attentional and emotional issues are somewhat similar to other typically developing populations. But again, there's so few studies that I'm not entirely sure that I would trust this. However, they're similar, but they're still elevated. So statistically, they may be the same, but there are higher rates of emotional and attentional issues. These sorts of dynamics have a lot of variability in things like the number of neurotypical siblings in the family. So emotional issues differ based on whether or not there are 4 neurotypical kids in the family or 1. And then also the relationship between siblings, and this is true of typical families as well, is it's dependent on the age discrepancy. So my parents have age discrepancies in their families up to 13 years from the oldest child to the youngest child. And anyone can see that the relationship between the oldest and the youngest is much different than the relationship between the oldest and the next youngest. So all of these all or nothing things are not all or nothing. They're dependent on a lot of different variables. And so you may be looking at this right now and thinking, this doesn't apply to me. There's a lot of complicated family dynamics that goes on, and that's okay. So there was a couple of studies that looked at the positive aspects of having a sibling with autism. And actually the way they did this is they asked siblings. In this study here that I'm showing you, it was actually sisters, so girls who have either a male or a female sibling with autism, were asked to bring pictures of them with their sibling to different to a study essentially, and they were asked to recall bad things and good things about that picture. So this was a way to elicit some factors. They seem to have a greater sense of acceptance, commitment, and valuing differences. They remembered the fun times in those pictures rather than the the more distressing times. They also seem to communicate in reciprocal ways to create flexible environments. They have better participation with the community. They have higher empathy and better perspective taking. And parents report them as being more mature. And I'll get around to differences that siblings experiences versus what their parents experience in a minute. But when sisters recall things, most of them the pictures had to do with sleep, lunch, or bath time routines, followed by pictures of other family members. So these are sorts of the things that as a sibling kind of recalls or was asked to bring some sort of record or memory of their experiences, they literally brought out pictures of things like family members, sleep, sibling shared time, birthday parties, things like that. So things that elicit positive experiences, which is good to hear. It's not all about the time that your sibling, bit you till you bled or something like that. It was very positive. Oops. So I talked about this beyond the infancy and beyond the lifespan. I have to say that there are fewer studies published, and I hope to see more in the coming years, even in the coming months. I would love for there to be some additional studies. I think when people were sending me some and I was reviewing some, it was like a dozen. That's really not acceptable. So there are fewer studies across the lifespan than there are in infants. They are qualitative and quantitative. And when I say that, I mean qualitative meaning that the siblings kind of share their experiences in an open-ended way after a question is given. So one of the questions was, what are the worries that you have? And this was in the UK. The name is Seamus. I worry about how I can best look after Seamus and make sure he lives his best life while also having one of my own. And then someone was asked about, you know, their thoughts about having a family of their own. I do want a child, but how do I do both? I want to do okay by both my sister and a child. So yeah, that would be a worry for me. And there's a sense of guilt, a sense of duty, and a sense of responsibility, and the sense of conflict between your obligation to your sibling and your obligation to your other family. And then how other family members how are other family members kind of cooperating or participating in the larger family dynamic. One person wrote, my cousin is one of the very few people my age who can visit us without panicking. We're all comfortable with her as she knows us, she knows about autism, and she's comfortable around my brother. That saves me and my parents from feeling worried or awkward having a visitor to understand my brother. You know, my brother can also run free in STEM without having critical eyes on him. So this cousin is really a lifesaver. With my classmates, I would feel worried to tidy up or make sure my brother doesn't show up in the living room. It's just harder. And quantitative, meaning that they assign kind of values to different behaviors or feelings, and we'll get to those in a minute. And I also want to mention that there are international perspectives on this topic, which I think is great. And I want there to be more international perspectives because, as you'll see, the way different countries look at autism definitely explains a lot about how the feelings about siblings are. So the studies that I found have been, of course, in the US and the UK and Taiwan and even South Africa. So what makes siblings special? And this came from an article that I thought really kind of captured it. It's those shared experiences of childhood that create that close emotional bond with brothers and sisters. And siblings also have a heightened sensitivity to their needs and feelings. And that is probably where that increased sense of empathy comes from. These connections, reflective of things like high interdependency, the dependency that siblings have amongst each other, the strong attachment to siblings, and intimacy and responsibility over the time that they spend with their siblings, their family, and their friends, all support the idea that in many cases, siblings share a high moral obligation to care for their siblings. And you know, this is really a beautiful thing that siblings have this sense of obligation and responsibility. And when I say care, care can be financial, it can be awareness of the needs, it can be staying close and supportive, and it can even be, you know, literally just being on this webinar and learning more about how other people are feeling and what actions people can take to take care of themselves, and then also other family members and how they can learn more about, you know, being a sibling. So what makes siblings special is part of which is you're on this podcast right now. Okay, so next slide. So there have been some studies that I just want to share with you, not that these apply to everybody, not that they're meant to be, you know, the hard and fast rule, about attitudes of siblings and how they adjust. And so first of all, socioeconomic status may play a role in this. The reason I say that is because, and I'm a working mother, so I'm not trying to give any other working mothers guilt, but sometimes if a parent is around more often, they may be able to support that sibling more than if they couldn't. And that's not a hard and fast rule, because I think I do a pretty good job. So siblings also felt more positive emotions about their siblings when they're younger. But they had these positive emotions. They're a sibling, but when they're younger, and think about it, this is totally normal. They didn't really have much understanding of their relationship, and they also had poor feelings of their interactions. Imagine being a 5-year-old who all they want to do is, you know, play dolls with their sibling or trucks with their brother, and their brother isn't interested in playing with them in the same way. When you're young, guess what? Be honest. It's okay. There shouldn't be any guilt. This is normal. Now, adult siblings are able to maintain those positive feelings of siblings into adulthood. So, you know, no matter when those positive feelings start to emerge, whether when they're really young, like 3 to 5 years old, or whether they're in adolescence, they maintain those positive feelings into adulthood. They do have increased feelings of responsibility, as I've mentioned before. There's also specific challenges with having a sibling with autism that has been specifically related to aggression. And you can imagine, and I've seen this in my own daughters, one of them showing severe aggression towards the other. And of course, anyone is going to kind of be afraid of that and get challenged by that and feel like that's an obstacle to having a positive relationship. But, you know, sometimes this is the reality, and it can help explain why there are some mixed feelings through childhood and even adulthood in siblings that are highly aggressive. They seem to have siblings have strong emotional ties, not just to their sibling, but to their entire family, which is amazing, and it's kind of sometimes a rare thing in this kind of world of kind of dysfunctional families. Now, there's also one neurotypical sibling. There's one neurotypical sibling that is usually the most involved. So I talked about families that have more than one neurotypical sibling. The dynamics of the family is normally that there is one neurotypical sibling that's usually the one that's the most involved. That's not a judgment, that's just a fact that comes out from science. It could be that neurotypical sibling, typically it's a girl, but it could be that one is the oldest. It could be the one that has always shown the greatest amount of responsibility, but that it really kind of is what it is. People that have a poor quality with their sibling, that is associated with anxiety. I can tell you it's probably associated with anxiety in neurotypical sibs, but it seems to be elevated even more so in siblings with a sibling with autism. And I think that question needs to be further explained or further studied so that that can be improved, or the feelings of anxiety can be improved. So while I said before that parents report the sibling without autism, the neurotypical sibling, to be more mature, when you look at the ratings of the siblings themselves about their relationship with their sibling versus parents looking down and looking at the relationship between the siblings, it can be somewhat different. And the effects are small, but parents typically, and this is small, but it's there, report a less positive relationship and more negative behaviors within the sibling relationship compared to the siblings themselves. So if you ask a parent, how would they rate their child-sibling relationship, they may say this. And then if you ask the sibling, how do they rate their relationship, they rate it a little bit higher. Now, we're not talking about here and here, we're talking about small differences, but I always find that interesting to see, and I wonder if that's the case with the people on the call. So family functioning, of course, this affects the entire family. Again, the quality of the adult relationship is predicted by the adolescent and child relationship. Oops. There seems to be no real rule about functioning in a typically developing sibling, whether or not the sibling has autism. So it's not like, you know, if you have a sibling with autism, you definitely have a higher level of anxiety, or you definitely have more feelings of emotional insecurities. That's not the case. There's absolutely no rule about that. Everyone has their own experiences. Just what I mentioned before, but sisters of sisters tend to be the most involved and the most engaged. I know that there are sisters of brothers. That doesn't mean you're not engaged. It just means in the studies that have been done, which have been few and far between, it's the sisters of the sisters that are most involved and engaged. And again, difficult behaviors and level of aggression are really important in developing that relationship. So if you have a sibling on the spectrum who's very, very aggressive towards you or family members, or shows really difficult behaviors, then of course that's going to kind of color your relationship with your sibling. Now, this is what I thought was very interesting. So there was a study that looked at sibling relationships in Taiwan versus the United Kingdom. In Taiwan, there is still an immense cultural stigma of autism. And so individuals with autism in Taiwan are usually considered diseased, or they're not accepted. Their behaviors are not as embraced in public settings as they are in other countries. Whereas in the UK, there is a much different model where most people feel that people with autism are actually more part of a neurodiverse movement where there are differences but not impairments. And so culture plays a huge role, right? So autism is highly stigmatized in Taiwan, and so that affects the family dynamics. So siblings in Taiwan, and I even have a friend, she was an intern at ASF one year, who's a sibling in South Korea. And she actually started a support group because she felt so stigmatized. It wasn't as if she was afraid to go out with her brother. She and her mother did anyway, but the looks that they would get, and I'm sure you've all experienced this, but because the stigma is so high in Taiwan, there's a real difference in the way siblings feel in general versus in the UK, where it's considered more of kind of like normal differences. And what comes out over and over again is that social support is critical. Having larger families that each are supportive, your spouse can be a source of support, parents, and of course, friends. And so where this social support comes from, it's really, you know, this is where it mostly comes from, but it doesn't mean that these are the only individuals in someone's life that can provide social support. So if your larger family, your parents, your friends, your spouse understands autism and can provide a supportive environment for your sibling, that's a chance for you to relate to other siblings. This is a model, and did I put his picture up? Okay, I thought I was going to. So this is a model out of the lab of Dr. Matt Lerner at Stony Brook University. And they have done what I consider to be the most comprehensive study of family functioning within a family where there's somebody who has an autism diagnosis. And they were focused on that typically developing sibling, and they looked at things like the presence of a father, the number of children in the family, the gender composition, whether it was a boy, boy, girl, 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 boy, the age discrepancy between the siblings, and family income. And they also looked at the ASD variables. So did the child with ASD have high symptom severity? Did they have problem behaviors? And they looked at family variables, like was there support within the entire family? Was the mom depressed? Was the mom under a lot of stress? And then what was the relationship quality between the typically developing sibling and the individual with autism? And what I found particularly helpful to know is that in children with problem behaviors, that highly influenced, that was almost like the biggest influence on the sibling relationship quality. And that sibling relationship quality then resulted in either internalizing behaviors in the typically developing sibling. Those internalizing things are things like depression and anxiety and mood changes, or externalizing behaviors, which is things like acting out and fighting and feelings of frustration. So, really the relationship quality is influenced by the behavior of the child, but really that relationship quality does influence the psychological well-being of the typically developing sibling. So what I felt was so interesting to share with you is that, and there's 2 slides on this, and then I'm going to shut up, is that that, as I mentioned, that social support was so critical. Well, a couple of studies have used social support as an intervention tool to help typically developing siblings work on things like coping skills and externalizing behavior. So these are support groups. There is a new model where there's a parent trading add-on. There is the Sib Shop model and the Sibling Support Project. And then there are things like SibNets, which are less social support and more recreational tools for typically developing siblings. And as you can see from this graph, this was a support group model. And those in the support group who were getting, it was either a support group or they were put on like a wait list and given like a manual on how to cope. So at the beginning, they had poor coping skills, and this was done somewhat randomly, but there was still a difference. But by the end, the support group showed a higher level of coping skills. And the same on externalizing behaviors. They showed slightly higher but non-significant higher levels of externalizing behavior before these support groups met. And then after, it significantly decreased, not only from themselves, but from those who were in the control group, so who didn't get the actual active model. There was a group in Washington, and they did the Sib Shops model, and this was a combination of support and then also recreational activities. Over 90%, so they not just did it when the kids were little, they followed them as adults many years later, and they found that 90% of the siblings said that it had a positive effect of not only their own feelings, but the feelings they had for their siblings. They were taught coping strategies. 3/4 of them reported that this Sib Shop affected their adult lives. 94% said that they would recommend it to others. But then overall, they found the effects were positive and, what's more important, enduring. So these childhood or adolescence experiences really helped shape the relationships going forward. So that's the end of the, that's the end of the presentation. I'm going to use this time to kind of take notes because Kimberly is going to take over and kind of describe some of the things that are going on at the Els Center and what they're doing and how they're helping the community. So I'm going to turn it over to you. And then Kimberly, I'm also just going to take some notes so that we can capture what was said. Is that okay?
That's perfect. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you for that wonderful presentation of the research. I think it's so needed. As you said, we need more research and recognizing that we need more programs for our siblings. At the Els for Autism Foundation, we were intending to begin a program in April before the COVID-19. And so when we were all sent, for the stay-at-home order, our leadership team said, we need to serve our families. How can we continue to serve our families? And recognizing that siblings are a large part of the family, and it's gone unrecognized and underserved for quite a while. So rather than wait, we went ahead and began our virtual SIB rooms to treat that need. Also recognizing that one of the most common feelings siblings express is isolation. So here we are going into a situation where they're even more isolated. They're not able to go to school or college, or if they're an adult, go to their occupation, but they're more in the home now, and the whole entire structure is being changed. Families have more pressure, parents have more stressors, so siblings are going to be home with their special needs siblings, so we need to provide some support. So we began our virtual SIB rooms, and they are amazing. The kids are awesome. We started with the age range of 8 to 13 for this time, and the way that they're run are, you know, pieces of, like you mentioned, the recreation piece in the SIB shops. So part of it is a fun aspect to get to know you, and then there's also a counseling, you know, therapy coping skills component built in. So we come on, it lasts usually an hour. Most of the people have come each week, but sometimes we'll have a new member. So I'll begin with just a general introduction that we're here and what we have in common. Some of the commonly felt feelings, and then we'll go through our guidelines. I use the same word you did in the beginning. Guidelines and or rules, they're hidden under the term guidelines. So we set up just for it to be a safe place for our siblings to come and express their feelings, their concerns, and to talk openly about some of the feelings that aren't easy to say, like resentment or isolation or embarrassment, and also talking about the positive feelings of joy and pride. So we set up the guidelines that what you say here stays here, and that it's a safe place to express your feelings. I also include a rule that you can skip or pass any question that comes up, because we do icebreakers and things like that. And then being that this virtual setting is new for all of our children, I also have a guideline that they may choose to turn on their camera or off their camera. They're not required to show. They can just kind of sit and listen, join in when they want to, but they really do participate, and as the time is going on, you'll see them support each other, and it's really a beautiful thing to see. So we'll usually do some type of icebreaker, and I build in questions that involve sibling topics, and also some things that involve establishing their coping skills and their self-esteem. So we've done things like feeling word headbands, you know, virtually, where we create feeling lists, and then we talk about how that applies and, you know, at home with our siblings. And we usually end with something that we're going to bring back next week. So we've done things like show and tell. It was funny when you mentioned the pictures in your research review. We had one of our show and tell where you bring a picture of a memory with the sibling, and the memory was positive. And we talked about that, exactly what you said, you know, that moment, say at Disney World, might have been a lot of fussing, and, you know, your sibling might have just had a meltdown or something, you know, that was difficult. But the memory, when you look back over time, is positive, and they're really beautiful, you know, that way. I notice with our siblings, and you see a lot of compassion and a lot of empathy, and just really special people. So it's an honor to work with them. And we are now on a couple of months running the SIB shops, and we're going to continue, you know, to serve that population. So that's kind of what we're doing, and we can take any questions that you might have about that.
So anyone, just feel free to unmute yourself. If you're not on, if you're previously unmuted, send me a note in the question asking to be unmuted, and I'll totally unmute you. Or you can type it in the question, you know, in the question box, and I'll share it if you don't want to do that. So I know we have a couple of siblings on. Have a couple of siblings on, so you guys can just, you know, introduce yourselves if you'd like, or not, or ask a question about what the Els Center is. Look at me, my spelling. What the Els Center is doing. We do have one question about expanding the program, Kimberly, to adults, and what the
Yes.
And adults, I guess, could be a wide audience, you know, 18
Absolutely.
to 75.
The adults, and I meant to say after that SIB room, we also have another room called Families Coping Through Conversation. And that's intended to be an open, time frame for siblings to come on, parents to come on, anyone involved. It's general for anyone that we can support. So we also have that. That's Tuesday evenings at 8 p.m. So I think that, the adult population, the college population, the teen population is also essential to have programs for them. A lot of adults are managing both their parents' care and their special needs siblings, or their own children and a sibling when, once they become an adult. So I think that we definitely can, as of right now, we can meet that need in our Families Coping Through Conversation. Please feel free to email me and I can send you the link to join in.
I will post, let me see if I can post your email address. If I open up my email, that'll be a big mess. You know what? Can you just quickly type out your email? Read out your email and I'll type it up here.
Sure, and my name is shown, I think it's shown to everyone that way. So it is my name. It's not capitalized for the email, but it's Kimberly _Revicchio as shown. Exactly, and it's lowercase, but I don't think it matters for the email. And then it's R-I. V-I-E, it's quite a name, D-C-I-O at autism.org. Perfect. So
so if people are interested in either starting or participating in a group outside the ages of 8 to 13, they should contact you?
They can contact me. I can connect them with Erin Lozad, our Director of Clinical Services, for any questions about the programs that we offer. And if they're interested in joining the Families Coping Through Conversation, I can send them that link.
We also have a question. What are the emotional and psychological implications of training a sibling to become the RBT for their brother or sister?
We have a lot of professionals at Els for Autism that are also siblings. We see a trend of siblings entering the profession. And I think that a lot of them are able to do that very successfully, and they bring a lot of skills and readiness and capabilities to the position. So I think that's seen quite frequently, RBTs, SLPs, behavior analysts, etc.
And that person also mentioned it's recommended that they do not become the therapist. So that become a therapist, become a professional, but don't try and test your stuff on your own family.
Right, not on your direct family. That's an excellent point, and I'm glad that they made that. Absolutely. It's hard to be neutral with our own children and our own lives. It's important to be able to work outside of that. So if you are an RBT or SLP or a professional in any field, a lot of times you want to avoid that dual role. Same with counselors.
We have another question about virtual resources. So are there things like social media groups that allow siblings to communicate and share if they don't want to be on screen, for example, or be present? Are there, I don't think it would be as effective, but do those sorts of forums exist?
Right now, we're offering several virtual programs with Els for Autism, and if they email me, I can make sure that they receive our newsletter. Every week, the programs for the week are coming out, from recreation programs to connections programs, teenage programs, job club, things like that. So we are offering several virtual programs, so I can connect them with our information.
Okay. Are there any resources, including websites, articles, and books that you recommend for helping siblings understand autism? And I think this might be more recommended for younger siblings, or maybe older siblings, depending on the purpose of the resource.
One of the recommendations is that siblings are connected with age-appropriate reading materials. So, you know, having a list of those resources. Are they looking for specific names of places to go? The Sibling Support Project has a list on Facebook. The SibNet is another organization you have to be a sibling to connect with. They ask you a few questions, and they have a running list of resources as well.
That's great. What I'll do is I will Google them, link to this PowerPoint page, and then maybe get in touch with them and then see if those resources can be shared.
Yes, I have a few websites here, the Sib Shop, SibNet, and maybe I can send you this and we can link it.
Yes.
They have Sib Team, SibNet, the different Sib shops, even the grandparents, the support for grandparents. And then the one on top is the Florida Sibling Alliance state chapter. Several of these are on Facebook as well. And that's one of the recommendations for parents, if there's any, I don't know if there's any parents that are listening, but connecting your child with other siblings, whether it's through recreation or whether it's through some type of support forum online or in person, is something of, you know, of value. And are there any parents that possibly have any questions that I can, some tips of things that are recommended? You know, I think one of the things are that the sibling enjoys having time one-on-one with their parent. And we've learned that a little goes a long way in terms of that. So even a 10-minute car ride, or, you know, if the special needs sibling goes to bed before the other sibling and you will give them 10, 15 minutes of just chatting and spending time with them, we found that that's very helpful. And also having something that is outside of the disability, just whether it's recreation, whether it's a hobby, special outings, temple, church, something else that the whole family can connect with, game night if that works well for your family, or throwing the football, whatever is an activity that works for a family, having something outside of the disability. And also answering questions that they have. A lot of siblings have questions about the future, what's expected of them, fear of the future, worrying about, you know, how will I be required to financially support my sibling? So having those conversations. Another thing that I've heard that a sibling did with their family was to put a journal under their pillow, and the child was able to write questions if they had worries at night, or if they had questions for their parent. They were able to write it in the journal, and they communicated that way. So those are some of the things that parents can do as well.
Sorry, I keep skipping through here. Hold on.
You're doing good. You're typing that very fast.
So I know one of these is located in Washington. How would someone go about finding local resources, or is in this age of virtual, you know, everything's now virtual and it ain't going away thanks to the pandemic. Right. Would you know, or instead of in-person activities, does the Els Center support Sibs from all outside the Florida area? Because you're located in Florida.
We're located in Florida, but with the virtual Sib room, we're able to have people join in from anywhere. So they don't need to be in Florida to receive the virtual program. And it's a free program at this time. So we're able to have anyone come on and participate. And we welcome you to do so. And, you know, like I said, it's not something that they have to come every time. It shouldn't feel like another therapy appointment or another thing that they have to do because they have a special needs sibling. It should be fun. You know, tonight we're bringing our favorite snack, our favorite homemade dessert. And we're doing a shield activity that is all, you know, coping and self-esteem types of things. So I try to make the activities so that a new person can hop in anytime. So it's not, you know, a requirement that they come every week, but most of them do. They have been coming back.
And how many siblings do you have in a normal group, like a typical group, I guess?
A typical group in the virtual setting is 4 to 6 people. We also have, and I know my Samantha, she's going to join us in one of our groups. We've had an adult sibling come in as well. That's a very powerful piece. They're able to validate the feelings and share experiences right away. It's a sort of insta-connect, because you see a lot of times where the sibling feels resentment and yet guilt for feeling that resentment, and then very protective at the same time. So you can have a scenario where they're embarrassed and they're mad, but they're fiercely protective of their sibling. So they feel all of those things at the same time. So we talk about, you know, having mixed feelings, and that's okay, and that's, you know, that's very common. And, you know, so when you say how you feel and then another sibling is able to understand, it's very powerful. And so the adult sibling has also been joining a few times as well. So that's been really neat. In person, you know, large recreation groups can run up to, say, 20 kids.
So we have a few minutes left, and I would love, you know, I'm a scientist and a researcher. I would love if siblings or parents or anyone typed in some questions, some research questions that they were hoping that could be answered. My whole statement, my whole approach is that every sibling relationship is different, and I completely agree with that. And sometimes research doesn't address some of the subtle differences. But what are some things that as parents or siblings you wish you knew, or what things that should have some scientific based evidence behind it? So I'm looking forward to those questions. We have another question from someone who says that you know, that their sibling struggles with isolation. And so are there groups that are targeted at developing virtual friendships?
I wanted to make sure I mentioned that we also have an in-person adult support group that is now running virtually. So that is for adults with autism. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned that as well if anyone has that need. I run it with Jennifer Smith, our licensed mental health counselor, as well at the Els for Autism Foundation, and it's for adults ages 18 and over.
And that's in person?
It's been in person for quite a while. So when the COVID pandemic occurred, we also moved that on to virtual through Zoom.
Okay.
It hasn't skipped a beat. That has continued running. And once we're back in the center, we will continue it in person.